Board interview readiness. Now, what I'm commonly looking for in a senior leader type of interview, this includes C-level as well as board directors, I'm looking for touch points in each one of these areas, and I'm going to expand on this of what exactly I mean by this. I want to understand that the leader knows that their values should be aligned with the organization's values, and that's how much of the decision making and the culture of the organization is formed. I want to make sure that the candidate also knows exactly where they fit, not just because I said where they fit or because the board pitch book stated that, but do you fit into that role? Are you a great fit for that role? And what other areas could you be a fit for? Expand upon that principle a little bit to show exactly where you fit. I'm going to give you a question shortly that I ask in every board director interview. And I'm becoming more and more known, either fortunately or unfortunately, for my interviews only lasting 10 minutes. If you can't make it past this question, I don't even expend any more time on the interview because I already know this, it's not going where I want it to go. I'll share that with you today. I want to make sure there's a learning mentality there. There was this feeling for many years that once you reach the board role, you've reached the epitome of your career and there was no need for any more learning. I can tell you that the learning just became exponential. The need for learning became exponential, and that's a positive thing. And then we'll talk about the other intelligences. Most people know these as one fit of EQ or emotional intelligence. I'll share a few other ones with you that you want to make sure you're aware of and that you're exhibiting in your demeanor. All right, so let's start out with the values area. One of the big areas I'm always trying to understand in a leader's viewpoint is, do they understand that values actually sits above the vision and the mission of the organization? That is what the organization stands for, the ethics, the principles, and the beliefs, and that's going to equal the culture. If the culture is not right, you're not able to reach your vision, you won't be able to reach your mission. It's as simple as that. We know this, it's been beaten into our brains for many years, we get it, but I want to make sure that in my interviews that the leader or the candidate understands that it sits above the vision and the mission, not just that vision equals culture equals risk level in the organization. I'm trying to drive a deeper meaning to this and a deeper understanding to see if that leader understands that. Now, further to this point of values, if we look at the overlay now of the board governance area versus the corporate governance being once the board meeting is over, the CEO steps out. The corporate governance to me is what's happening on a daily basis. The board governance, as you see, touches on the areas that are enshrined in red here. But the main thing I'm getting at here is I want a director to understand, if you had to replace the word of governance, what are they actually overseeing? What are they managing? What are they directing? And they need to know that at the end of the day, when we talk about governance, governance has a central bullseye of risk. And the next area that sits around that is the values and the culture. I can tell you definitively, in organizations where they don't focus on the values of the organization infused into the culture or becoming the culture, their risk level is extremely high. They have people that don't care about their roles. They have people that will say, you know what? I'm going to call that customer back tomorrow. It's not really a big deal. It's things that are ending with that's not such a big deal because there are no repercussions and ramifications to that, or an understanding that you want to do better. That's the culture aspect of this. Directors need to fully understand that values and culture encircles risk and encapsulates risk, and that truly is where some of the first evaluations of decisioning should be made. We call it values-based decisioning, also something we get into a very deep nature of in the IBDC course. Now, where we said earlier about aiming the discussion here, so where you fit. Now, one of the big mistakes we see with those that submit resumes or CVs is they have their name and then they maybe have a title there, and it's one title area. What they're missing in this is that boards are not looking again for just a one-trick pony to come in. We do this quite differently, or I should say successful board candidates do this quite differently. They combine what's called their major, which is typically one or two title areas and an expertise area, followed by, even more importantly, what we call your three minors. And your three minors are areas that correlate directly to common board committees. So I'll give an example of this of what I use in mine. My minors are strategy, governance, and technology/cybersecurity. And I give it the test at the end. I say, can I can I put the word committee after those expertise areas, and does it correlate to a common committee? So look at what we did right there. We took expertise areas, correlated them directly to the workhorse areas of the board as part of your packaging. So even before I dig into your board bio and your board document, I already know from your cover letter what your major and your minors are following your name. So it's a way of truly packaging yourself for board director consideration and aligning yourself to those areas of expertise because you understand where you're going to apply those areas of expertise on a board. Don't leave this to chance. Don't leave this to someone like me as an evaluator to figure out where you're going to be a good fit above and beyond the current one committee I need a member on. You have to paint the picture. This, again, is the difference in proper packaging for board directors. You're also, by the way, of course, aiming the discussion towards those areas to stick with our area of discussion here. Now, I mentioned a moment ago I was going to touch on this question I ask as we talk about where you're driving this discussion to, especially as it relates to an interview. And when we talk about strategy, we should really be thinking of strategy first and foremost as the delineation between objective and action, of course. If we look at it from a leadership lens, this I would see as the C level. The goals should correlate to the what and why. The strategy should correlate very simply to the word how. And the tasks, or even in this case, milestones, should correlate to the when and who. Now, this is great from a day-to-day operations lens, but what I'm looking for in the packaging aspect, or where you should be driving your conversations to, are this, or I should say, is this overlay of governance. Once the goals are set, you are ensuring the relevance of those goals. That is your governance role as a board director. Yes, you should be involved in the setting of the goals, but as it relates to your daily, monthly, quarterly, yearly functions, you are there as a director to ensure the relevance of those goals. Now, as it relates to strategy, once the how is defined, and that may be a joint effort between the CEO and the board, your role from a governance lens is to validate the approach. And in the task area, or as I like to more so say, the milestone area, you're only using that to measure progress. You're not necessarily, unless you need to drill down into a problem area, you don't need to understand the when and the who. You're measuring progress based on the delivery areas there. Now, where I'm going with all of this is being able, even for a CEO, to step out of their day-to-day operations and join a board meeting. I am watching intently to make sure that they can shift hats from this leadership realm I mentioned a moment ago to a governance hat. And I can tell immediately based on the types of questions they ask or the types of input they give in the boardroom. So for CEOs that are on this call today, know that savvy directors are truly evaluating you to see if you can shift gears and even switch hats as it relates to the types of areas of your focus, your questions, and your comments in the boardroom. They should be very focused in the governance area. And before I share that question with you, I told you, so I don't forget, let me just say, of course, across all of this, you have these risk consideration overlays. We like to say that there's really no area that can fall outside of budget, scope, and time, any type of risk that comes up. We know that we should always be evaluating comments and questions and updates and strategies and goals. We should always be looking at this in the board director's lens from a viewpoint of expectation and actuals to budget, scope, and time. Now, let me share with you the question I ask. And as I mentioned, I try to ask this always in the interview in the first 10 minutes, because I know based on my experience now that there's no way to fake this. And the interview is really it's not worth continuing on if this question cannot be answered. And as I ask this question, I want you to look exactly at this particular chart here. Here's my question. Tell me about your understanding of the interrelationship between strategy and governance. Now, the reason that question is very important is that if you're currently on a board, you see this also. If your board frequently goes off on tangents and you're talking about things that are very drilled down in the delivery area of the task area, or you're refocusing the majority of your board meeting on goals once they've been set. Yes, we want to evaluate and make sure they're still relevant, but the majority of most board meetings should actually be focused on the validation of the approach of the strategy. So When I ask this question of their understanding of the interrelationship between strategy and governance, what I'm going for is some sort of answer that aligns to the fact that they know where they're spending their effort, their focus, their questions, their comments. They're probing where they're spending the effort in their time in the boardroom. We could even say in their committee meetings. They are there for a majority of the time to validate the approach of the strategy. Know this, understand this. We go into, again, I know I mentioned this, a lot more detail on how to really make this make an impact. We talk about this in the course. But from a high level viewpoint on this, know that you need to be able to answer that question without any hesitation to understand, to make the evaluator also understand where you would drive that conversation to if you were indeed in the boardroom. You can also use this philosophy and this approach and this roadmap to actually guide the discussions in your interview to show that you are a person that's actively practicing this approach. All right. Also aiming your discussion, you want to get across that you are a person of continuous learning. We call this your career trifecta. So most people have expertise, which is your know-how. Most people have experience, which is the application of that know-how. Know that there's a third area here. I will honestly state that no director has been appointed solely based on the fact they have education and certification areas. However, I will tell you that it's very common when we get to the final 3 candidates or the final 2 candidates for a position of appointments, we will look at the education, any certifications. It helps us understand if they're viewing board directorship as a discipline. So keep in mind, there is a balance between these areas. Know that one may not lead the other depending on the role, but you want to try to keep a balance. And every year, as an example, I recommend to others, and I do myself, I do an evaluation, honest evaluation of myself to say, do I have the expertise, the experience, and the certification areas that I view as balanced, or do I have to put some of my efforts this year into that area? Could be focusing more on getting the expertise, the learning aspect of it. It could be going out and getting a third party outside body that also says that, yes, we also agree that Mark is great in this area. Those are the types of things, know, that we're looking for when we do evaluations. All right. And another area here, what we call the other intelligences, know that many people are familiar with emotional intelligence. I will tell you that only scratches the surface of things that you want to really try to get across that you're aware of and that you actively practice. 2, just to pick out so off the top of my head, mindfulness intelligence. This I view as the more proactive view aspect of EQ, whereas mindfulness is allowing you to read the room or the folks you're speaking to understand how something you state is going to be received. It's very important. Emotional intelligence to me and to many is the reactive approach to some sort of outside stimuli. In the case of mindfulness intelligence, this is the proactive aspect. The balance of EQ and MQ is quite important. You want to make sure you show that you have an understanding of those things. Quickly to mention about it, what we call adversity intelligence. This, if I had to use a more common word, I would tell you the word grit. Nobody was more disappointed than me to have to include this as part of a board director's evaluation. We would used to say, of course, someone that's in the C-level or on that path or the directorship level has grit. I can tell you that COVID brought out a lot of scenarios where we lacked grit in the boardroom or with individual directors. So now we measure for that. We ask questions about that. We ask for specific examples of hardships that were overcome and the types of emotional reactions that the leader and their direct reports had in their approach. So know that there is more focus that's going down the path of looking into AQ or adversity intelligence, which is grit.